Hotels are just expensive theater for people desperate to pretend they matter. The smiles are fake, the luxury is rented, and the entitlement is heavy enough to crack the marble floors. My name is Isabella Jordan. I run this place with an iron fist because I know exactly what it costs to survive when the world locks you out. My parents threw me away like trash 15 years ago to pamper my useless brother. Now they're standing in my lobby demanding a suite they cannot afford, unaware that the girl they discarded is the one holding the keys. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spend here with us. Let me show you how the perfect reunion falls apart. The difference between a 4-star hotel and a 5-star experience isn't the thread count of the sheets or the vintage of the champagne. It is the silence. It is the absolute, hermetically sealed absence of chaos. I stood in the center of the presidential suite on the top floor of the Grand Meridian, listening for a hum, a rattle, a flaw. There was nothing, just the hushed, expensive stillness of a room that cost $4,000 a night. I reached out and adjusted the stem of a white calla lily in the crystal vase on the center table. It was leaning perhaps 2 degrees too far to the left. I corrected it. Now it was perfect. Perfection is not an accident. It is a discipline. My name is Isabella Jordan, and at 29 years old, I am the youngest regional manager in the history of the Sterling Hotel Group. To my staff, I am a phantom present everywhere, seeing everything, but rarely heard, unless a standard has been breached. They fear me, but they also respect me, because they know that I can strip a bed faster than a housekeeper and balance a ledger better than the comptroller. I learned the hospitality business from the bottom scrubbing grout with a toothbrush, and I climbed my way to the top of this glass and steel tower, because I understood one fundamental truth. Hospitality is about control disguised as kindness. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out over the city. The traffic below was a river of red taillights, a messy, tangled world that I used to belong to. Up here, the air was filtered and cool. I adjusted the cuffs of my navy blazer, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle. People think I am obsessed with order because I am stiff or unfeeling. They are wrong. I am obsessed with order because I know what it feels like to have your life turned into debris. When you're 14 years old and your parents tell you to pack a trash bag and leave because you refuse to be a servant to your genius brother, you develop a permanent hunger for security. You learn that if you don't control your environment will destroy you. I survived the streets, the shelters, and the long, hungry nights by being smarter, harder, and more organized than everyone else. I built this life brick by brick, and I allowed no cracks in the mortar. My radio chirped, shattering the silence. It was the only sound allowed to interrupt me. Ms. Jordan. The voice belonged to Marcus, the front desk supervisor. He sounded tight, the vocal cords strained by the specific tension of a guest who refuses to hear the word no. I pressed the button on my lapel mic. Go ahead, Marcus. We have a situation at the desk. Ms. Jordan, he said, his professional veneer cracking slightly. I have a family here checking in for the reunion weekend. They are insistent. They claim their reservation has been mishandled and are demanding an upgrade to the presidential suite. Gratis. I frowned. The presidential suite was empty, obviously, as I was standing in it, but we never gave it away for free. It was the crown jewel. Giving it away devalued the brand. Explain the policy, Marcus. If they booked a standard queen, they get a standard queen. If they want the suite, they can pay the upgrade fee. I tried that, Marcus whispered, creating a sense of intimacy over the channel. The father is shouting. He says he knows the owner. He's making a scene in the lobby. Other guests are staring. I sighed, the sound sharp in the empty room. I'll check the cameras. Hold your position. Do not offer compensation yet. I pulled my tablet from my portfolio and tapped into the security feed. The high-definition camera over the reception desk zoomed in with crystal clarity. The image on the screen made my blood run cold. The world tilted on its axis. For a moment, the luxurious suite dissolved, and I was back on a porch in the dead of winter, shivering in a thin coat. Standing at my front desk, red-faced and gesticulating wildly, was my father, Robert. Next to him, looking bored and tapping on a smartphone, was my brother, Caleb. And hovering behind them, looking perpetually aggrieved, was my mother, Linda. It had been 15 years. 15 years of silence. 15 years since they told the neighbors I had run away on drugs to cover up the fact that they had kicked me out for refusing to do Caleb's laundry and homework. They looked older. My father's hair was thinning, his cheap suit ill-fitted around the waist. My mother wore a dress that was trying too hard to be elegant, the fabric straining. And Caleb looked exactly the same, just larger, soft, unearned confidence radiating off him like a bad cologne. "Ms. Jordan," Marcus asked in my ear, pulling me back to the present. "Should I call security?" I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the evict protocol. It would be so easy. I could have security escort them out. I could ban them from the property. I could remain the phantom in the tower, unseen and safe. But then I saw my father slam his hand on the marble counter, treating my staff, my people, like dirt. I saw him point a finger in Marcus's face. The old fear, the trembling child inside me, vanished. It was replaced by a cold, hard anger. This was my hotel. This was my territory, and nobody abused my staff. "No, Marcus," I said, my voice steady, dropping an octave into my corporate register. "Do not call security. I am coming down." I walked to the mirror in the foyer. I checked my hair. It was pulled back in a severe, immaculate bun. I checked my lipstick, a neutral professional berry shade. I straightened my name tag. It simply read, Isabella Jordan, Regional Manager. They wouldn't know the title. They wouldn't know the power that came with it. To them, I was just the rebellious daughter who vanished. To them, I was a failure. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the lilies one last time. I wasn't going down there as their daughter. I was going down there as the authority they never thought I would become. They wanted an upgrade. They wanted the VIP treatment. I would give them exactly what they asked for, and I would let the weight of it crush them. I opened the door of the suite and stepped into the hallway, the heavy click of the lock sealing the silence behind me. The elevator ride down was smooth, a silent descent into the lion's den. I watched the numbers tick down, 30, 29, 28. Each number was a year of my life I had reclaimed from them. By the time the doors slid open to the lobby, I was no longer Isabella the runaway. I was Ms. Jordan, and class was about to be in session. Have you ever had to face someone who underestimated you? Someone who cast you aside only to meet them later when you held all the cards? It is a terrifying and electrifying moment. If you have a story about a family reunion that went wrong, or a time you had to stand your ground against the people who were supposed to protect you, don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. Before I stepped into the line of fire, I spotted Arthur near the concierge desk. He was wrestling with a precarious stack of luggage belonging to a tour group that had just arrived from Osaka. To the untrained eye, Arthur looked like just another bellboy, a young man in a uniform that was slightly too stiff with a cap pulled low over his forehead. But I knew the intelligence behind those eyes and the strength in those hands. I caught his gaze across the polished marble floor. He paused just for a fraction of a second, and I gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. It was a signal we had developed over the last year, a shorthand for trouble is incoming. He finished loading the cart and moved toward the reception area, positioning himself to be available but invisible, the hallmark of excellent service. I needed him close, not just because he was the most competent member of my floor staff, but because seeing him treated poorly would be the final steel reinforcement I needed for my spine. I took a breath, locked my hands behind my back in the parade rest of a seasoned general, and marched toward the desk where Marcus was currently being flayed alive. As I approached, the voices became distinct. My father's voice had gained a gravelly smoker's rattle over the years, but the cadence of condescension was exactly as I remembered. "I don't care what the computer says, son." He was barking, leaning over the counter so far his tie dangled onto the guest register. "I demanded a suite when I called 3 months ago. A reunion is a special occasion. We have standards." Marcus looked up, relief washing over his face as I stepped into the circle of interaction. Sir, Marcus said, stepping back, this is Ms. Jordan, the regional manager. She can address your concerns. My father straightened up, adjusting his jacket. He looked at me, his eyes scanning my face, my suit, my shoes. There was zero recognition. None. To him, I was a functionary, a suit to be bullied. My mother, Linda, was busy inspecting her nails, looking bored by the inefficiency of the help. Good afternoon, I said. My voice was smooth, cool, and utterly devoid of the trembling child they had thrown out into the snow. I understand there is a discrepancy with your reservation. How may I be of service? My father scoffed, gesturing broadly at the lobby. Finally, someone with some authority. Your boy here is trying to put us in a standard room. We are the Miller family. We are here for the reunion. We require the presidential suite. I looked at the computer screen, pretending to check their file. I knew exactly what they had booked, the cheapest non-refundable rate available on a third-party discount site. They hadn't requested a suite. They were trying to bully their way into an upgrade they couldn't afford. It was their classic maneuver, create a scene until the manager crumbles, just to make the noise stop. I see your reservation here, Mr. Miller, I said, calmly. It appears you booked a deluxe queen. The presidential suite is a significant upgrade. It's not just about the room, a voice interjected from the side. Caleb stepped forward. He was holding a smartphone on a gimbal, filming himself, or the lobby, or perhaps just the air. He wore designer sneakers that I knew were knockoffs, and a t-shirt with a logo for a cryptocurrency that had crashed 6 months ago. I'm an influencer, he said, thrusting the camera slightly toward me. I have a very dedicated following. I'm going to be documenting this entire trip. If the accommodations are lacking, my audience will know. We're talking about brand damage here. Do you want that kind of heat? I looked at Caleb. He was 32 years old. Yet he still carried himself with the petulant arrogance of the teenage genius who had been promised the world and refused to work for it. We certainly value our digital reputation, I said, suppressing the urge to laugh. I knew his following. I had looked it up. He had 3,000 followers, most of them bots. However, policy dictates that upgrades are subject to availability and payment. This is ridiculous. My mother snapped, finally looking up. Robert, tell her. We aren't paying extra. We are guests. She looked at me with eyes that were cold and hard as flint. We expected better service from a chain like this. This was the moment, the pivot point. I could deny them, send them to their standard room, and watch them stew. But that wouldn't teach them anything. That wouldn't balance the scales. I needed them to ascend so that their fall would be absolute. I tapped the keyboard, making a show of overriding the system. I tell you what, I said, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. We have a special initiative running this week, the executive experience. I can move you into the presidential suite complimentary as a trial of our premium tier. The change in their demeanor was instant. The hostility evaporated, replaced by a smug, greasy satisfaction. They exchanged looks that said, "See, we won." That's more like it, my father said, puffing out his chest. I knew you were a smart woman. However, I continued, holding up a hand, because this is a trial of our most exclusive asset. There are conditions, strictly enforced conditions. I pulled a printed form from under the counter, a standard liability waiver we used for VIP events, though I emphasized the severity of it. You must agree to the code of conduct. The suite contains valuable art and amenities. Any damage, any disturbance to other guests, or any mistreatment of staff will result in the immediate revocation of the upgrade and a charge for the full rack rate of the room. I slid the paper across the marble. $4,000 a night. My father laughed, grabbing the pen. He didn't even read it. We know how to behave in a hotel, young lady. We aren't ruffians. He scribbled his signature. Caleb didn't even look up from his phone. My mother signed with a flourish. They had signed their own warrant, and they didn't even know it. Excellent, I said, taking the paper back and filing it. Arthur, I signaled. Arthur wheeled the cart over immediately. Please assist the Miller family with their luggage to the presidential suite. Arthur smiled, a genuine warm expression that usually disarmed even the most difficult guests. Right away, Ms. Jordan. Welcome to the Grand Meridian, folks. He reached for my mother's heavy vanity case. Careful with that, my mother shrieked, slapping his hand away. That is genuine leather. Don't scratch it. Arthur flinched, pulling his hand back. I apologize, ma'am. I'll be very gentle. My father sneered at him. You'd better be. You drop that and it's coming out of your tips. If you even get any. Caleb laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. Yeah, buddy, don't mess up. I'm filming. I watched Arthur's jaw tighten just once before he smoothed his expression back into neutrality. Understood, sir, Arthur said softly. He began loading the bags with precise, fluid motions, absorbing their abuse with a dignity they couldn't comprehend. I felt a hot coil of rage tighten in my stomach. They hadn't changed. Not one bit. They still viewed the world as a hierarchy where they were the kings and everyone else was a serf to be kicked. I had protected Arthur from the truth of who they were to me, simply telling him they were problematic VIPs. But seeing them treat the man I loved like a pack mule made the bile rise in my throat. I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep my hands from shaking. I will escort you up personally, I said, stepping out from behind the desk. I needed to see them in the room. I needed to see them claim the space that wasn't theirs. We walked to the elevators in a procession. My father walked in front, strutting. Caleb was next, narrating to his phone. So we just bullied the manager into the penthouse. That's how you do it, guys. Alpha moves only. My mother walked beside me, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. As the elevator doors slid open gold-plated mirrored surfaces, we stepped inside. The space was intimate, forcing us into proximity. I pressed the button for the penthouse. The lift rose smoothly, the silence stretching out. I stared straight ahead at the digital numbers, counting the seconds. Suddenly, I felt eyes on me. I didn't turn. You know, my mother said slowly. The air in the elevator seemed to thin. You look incredibly familiar. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I kept my face frozen. I turned my head slowly to look at her. She was studying my profile, her brow furrowed. She was looking for the scared 14-year-old girl in the oversized hoodie. She was looking for the daughter she had erased. But she was looking at a woman in a $1,200 suit with her hair lacquered into submission. I get that often, madam, I said, my voice bored. I have a very common face. My mother narrowed her eyes, tilting her head. No, it's the eyes you have. She trailed off, looking at my name tag. Ms. Jordan. She said the name, testing the weight of it. Jordan. It was a common name, yes, but it was our name. For a second, I thought the game was over. I thought she would scream or hug me or accuse me. But then she shook her head and let out a dismissive scoff. No, never mind. We had a daughter once, but she was flighty, unstable, ran away years ago, probably dead in a ditch somewhere by now, or working at a diner. She certainly wouldn't be running a place like this. She turned back to face the doors. She didn't have the discipline. The words hit me like a physical blow. Dead in a ditch. No discipline. It wasn't just a lie they told the neighbors. It was a lie they told themselves to justify their cruelty. They couldn't imagine a version of me that was successful because it would mean they were wrong. It would mean they threw away a diamond thinking it was glass. I see, I said, and my voice was colder than the liquid nitrogen in the kitchen freezers. Well, rest assured, Mrs. Miller, the staff here has nothing but the utmost discipline. We adhere strictly to the rules. The elevator chimed softly. Ping, the doors opened to the foyer of the presidential suite. After you, I said, gesturing them forward. They stepped out into the opulence, oohing and ahing immediately, forgetting me, forgetting Arthur, forgetting everything but their own greed. I watched them walk in. They were walking into a trap, and they were so blinded by the gold plating they couldn't see the cage door swinging shut behind them. Have you ever stood right in front of someone who should know you better than anyone, yet they looked right through you because you didn't fit their narrative of failure? If you've ever been invisible to the people who were supposed to see you, Don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. It took less than 4 hours for the Miller family to turn the presidential suite into a frat house. The reports started coming in at 3:00 p.m. First, it was the housekeeping supervisor whispering frantically that Mrs. Miller had demanded the Egyptian cotton sheets be changed because they smelled like polyester. Then it was the executive chef furious because Caleb had ordered a Wagyu steak well done with ketchup and item, not even on the room service menu, and then sent it back 3 times claiming it was tough. But the breaking point, and the moment the universe aligned to hand me my weapon, came at 4:30 p.m. I received a call from Arthur. His voice was calm, but I could hear the tremor of suppressed adrenaline. "Ms. Jordan," he said, "Mr. Miller is demanding to speak to the owner. He says I stole his watch." I stared at the phone. It was the oldest grift in the book. A guest claims a staff member stole a valuable item to extort a free stay or get an employee fired for sport. But to do it to Arthur, to the man whose integrity was the bedrock of this hotel, it was a mistake of tactical proportions they couldn't possibly comprehend. "Stay there, Arthur," I said. "Do not engage. I am bringing Mr. Sterling." It was a happy accident of fate, or perhaps divine intervention, that Mr. Elias Sterling, the owner of the Sterling Hotel Group, was indeed on the property. We had been scheduled for a transition meeting that afternoon, a meeting I had been preparing for all week. I found Mr. Sterling in the executive lounge sipping an espresso. He was a man of 65 with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Sterling," I said, approaching him, "we have a situation in the presidential suite. I believe it requires your personal touch." I briefed him quickly on the guests, the trial upgrade, and the accusation against Arthur. I left out the fact that they were my parents. That was a card I needed to play at the precise moment of maximum impact. Mr. Sterling listened, his face unreadable. Then he stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Lead the way, Ms. Jordan. I always enjoy a live performance." We rode the elevator in silence, accompanied by Arthur, who met us on the landing. Arthur refused to look at his father, Mr. Sterling, and maintained his role as the bellboy. When we arrived at the suite, the door was ajar. Inside, the chaos was palpable. Room service trays were piled high with half-eaten food. Towels were strewn across the Italian leather sofas. Caleb was lounging on the dining table on the table, live streaming. "Yo, guys, we're about to get this waiter fired. That's what happens when you mess with the Millers," he said to his phone. My father was pacing, his face a mottled red. My mother was sitting with her arms crossed, looking like a queen in exile. When they saw me enter, my father lunged forward. "You!" he shouted. "Finally, I want this boy arrested. I left my Rolex on the nightstand and now it's gone. He's the only one who's been in here." "A serious accusation," I said, stepping aside to reveal Mr. Sterling. "Mr. Miller, this is Mr. Elias Sterling, the owner of this hotel chain." The transformation in my parents was instantaneous and grotesque. My father's rage evaporated, replaced by an oily, sycophantic grin. He practically bowed. "Mr. Sterling, an honor truly. I apologize for the unpleasantness. We are huge admirers of your establishment." My mother stood up, smoothing her dress suddenly, the picture of grace. "Mr. Sterling," she purred, "we are so sorry to bother a man of your stature, but we felt you should know. Your staff is rot. Absolute rot." She pointed a manicured finger at Arthur, who stood silently by the door, head bowed. "That boy is a thief. And this manager," she gestured dismissively at me, "she is incompetent, rude." She rolled her eyes at us. "She clearly has no control over her employees. If I were you, I'd clean house." Mr. Sterling clasped his hands behind his back and walked slowly into the room. He surveyed the mess, the ketchup on the carpet, the wet towels on the upholstery. He looked at Caleb, who was still filming. "Bill, is that so?" Mr. Sterling asked, his voice mild. "You feel Ms. Jordan is incompetent?" "Oh, completely," my father said, eager to bond with the big man. "She's been nothing but trouble since we arrived. Attitude problem. Probably in diversity hire, if I'm being honest. She lacks pedigree." I stood perfectly still. The insult didn't sting. It just added another line to the ledger. "And the boy?" Mr. Sterling asked, looking at Arthur. "He stole the watch?" Saw him with my own eyes. My father lied effortlessly, slipped it right into his pocket. Mr. Sterling nodded slowly. The room was silent save for the hum of the air conditioning and Caleb's heavy breathing. Then Mr. Sterling turned to me. "What is your assessment of the situation, Ms. Jordan?" My father blinked confused. "Why are you asking her? She's the problem." Mr. Sterling ignored him, keeping his eyes locked on mine. "Ms. Jordan, my assessment, sir," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a scalpel, "is that the guests are in violation of the code of conduct signed at 2:15 p.m. They have damaged property, they have abused staff, and they have filed a false police report regarding a theft, as the room sensors indicate the safe has not been opened and no object of that density has left the suite." I paused. Furthermore, the watch Mr. Miller is referring to is currently on his left wrist, turned inward. My father froze. He looked down. Indeed, in his anger, he had forgotten to take it off. He quickly tried to cover it with his cuff, but it was too late. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Caleb stopped filming. My mother looked from the watch to Mr. Sterling, her face paling. "Well," my father stammered, I must have found it. But that doesn't excuse her attitude." Mr. Sterling sighed. He reached into his inside pocket and pulled out a leather folio. "Mr. Miller, I did not come up here to fire my staff. I came up here to make an announcement." He walked over to me. "I am 65 years old. I have built this company from nothing, but a company is only as good as its leadership." He opened the folio. Inside was a heavy ornate key and a stack of legal documents. "Today is my last day as CEO. Effective immediately, I am stepping down." My father's eyes widened. "You're selling?" "No," Sterling said. "I am handing it over." He turned to me and held out the folio. "Ms. Jordan isn't just a manager, Mr. Miller. She is the finest hotelier I have ever met. She turned this branch into the highest grossing location in the portfolio. She works harder than anyone, cares more than anyone, and has a backbone of steel." He placed the documents in my hands. "Isabella, the company is yours. You are the new CEO of the Sterling Group." The sound in the room vanished. My parents looked at me as if I had suddenly sprouted wings. My father's mouth opened and closed fish-like. "CEO," he whispered. She," my mother gasped. "But she's—" And regarding the thief, Mr. Sterling continued, turning to Arthur. "Arthur, come here." Arthur stepped forward. He reached up and took off his bellboy cap. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking less like a servant and more like the Ivy League graduate he was. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller," Sterling said. "Allow me to introduce my son, Arthur Sterling." My mother let out a strangled squeak. She grabbed the back of the sofa for support. "Your son?" "Yes," Sterling said. "He believes in understanding the business from the ground up. He's been carrying your bags and taking your abuse for 3 hours." Sterling smiled, but it was a shark smile. "And more importantly, he is Ms. Jordan's fiancé." Arthur moved to my side, slipping his arm around my waist. He looked at my parents, his expression cold. "You were rude to my staff, you lied to my father, and you insulted my future wife," Arthur said. "I'd say you've had a busy afternoon." The color drained from my parents' faces completely. The dynamic in the room shifted so violently it was almost physical. They were no longer the wealthy guests bullying the help. They were liars caught in the headlights, facing the owners of the very world they were trying to exploit. Caleb lowered his phone, realizing he had just live-streamed his family's destruction to his 3,000 bots. My father looked at Mr. Sterling, then at Arthur, and finally he looked at me. Really looked at me. He saw the suit. He saw the keys in my hand. He saw the man beside me. And he saw the terrifying reality that the daughter he had thrown away was now holding his fate in her hands. I took a step forward. I didn't yell. I didn't rage. I let the silence stretch until it was agonizing. Then I dropped the corporate mask. I let the M's Jordan persona slide away, revealing the daughter they thought they had broken. I looked my father in the eye, then my mother. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Hello, Mother," I said softly. "Hello, Father." The silence that followed my greeting was heavy, thick enough to choke on. My parents stood there frozen in a tableau of absolute shock. My father's face was a study in cognitive dissonance. He was trying to reconcile the image of the rebellious, useless daughter he had discarded with the image of the woman currently holding the keys to a hospitality empire. But it was Caleb who moved first. Of course it was Caleb. He had the survival instincts of a parasite, always sensing when the host was dying and it was time to jump to a healthier vessel. He shoved his phone into his pocket, his earlier bravado vanishing like smoke. A wide plastic smile stretched across his face as he stepped over the pile of dirty towels he had dropped on the floor. "Izzy," he exclaimed, opening his arms as if we were long-lost friends reuniting at an airport. I knew it. I told them, didn't I? I said, "There's something about her. Come here, sis." He moved to hug me, presuming that shared DNA was a free pass to my new status. He saw a CEO, and he saw a paycheck. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I simply raised my right-hand palm. Out fingers spread flat. It was a simple gesture, the universal sign for stop. But I executed it with the authority of a traffic cop halting a semi-truck. Caleb froze mid-stride, his arms still open, looking foolish. "Do not," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "take another step." The smile slid off his face. "Come on, Izzy. It's me, Caleb, your brother." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in 15 years. I saw the weakness in his jaw, the entitlement in his eyes. My brother died the night he watched our parents, locked the door in my face, and went back to playing video games. I said, "You are just a guest who has overstayed his welcome." My father cleared his throat, a jagged, nervous sound. He adjusted his tie, trying to summon the patriarch persona that had terrified me as a child. It didn't work. The power had shifted, and he knew it. "Now, Isabella," he began, his voice wavering. "Let's not be dramatic. We were shocked. It's been a long time. Emotions are running high. But we're family, and family forgives." My mother nodded vigorously, clutching her handbag. "Yes, exactly. We made mistakes, sure. But look at you. You're successful. You're tough." She forced a smile, her eyes darting to Mr. Sterling, who was watching quietly from the corner. "We did what we had to do. We knew you needed a push. If we hadn't been hard on you, you wouldn't be standing here today. You'd be soft." I felt a cold laugh bubbling in my chest, but I suppressed it. It was the classic defense of the abuser, claiming credit for the survivor's resilience. I walked over to the dining table, pushed aside a tray of half-eaten burgers, and placed the folio of legal documents down. Then I pulled out my tablet. I tapped the screen, bringing up a blank spreadsheet. "Let's review the narrative, shall we?" I said, looking up at them. "You claim you kicked me out to make me tough. But I remember the conversation differently. I remember you telling me that Caleb was a genius who needed his energy for his studies, and therefore I was required to do his laundry, clean his room, and cook his meals. When I refused because I had my own homework, you told me I was ungrateful. You told me to leave. We were teaching you responsibility." My father blustered, though his face was turning a sickly shade of gray. "I learned responsibility," I countered, my voice steady. "I learned it when I slept in a bus station for 3 nights in February. I learned it when I lied about my age to get a job washing dishes at a diner so I could buy a winter coat. I learned it when I put myself through community college while working the night shift at the front desk of a motel." I swiped the screen of the tablet, though the gesture was purely theatrical. "And while I was doing that, you were busy spinning a story. I did a background check on myself when I applied for this management position. Do you know what I found? Community rumors." I locked eyes with my mother. "You told Mrs. Gable next door that I ran away because I was on drugs. You told the church group I was troubled and refused to follow God's law. You assassinated my character to cover your own shame." My mother flinched, as if I had slapped her. We, we had to say something, she whispered. People were asking. It was embarrassing, Isabella, a daughter running away. It reflected poorly on us. And that is the crux of it, I said, closing the tablet cover with a sharp snap. It was never about me. It was always about how I reflected on you. I took a step closer, towering over them in my heels. I am the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I have never touched a drug in my life. I have never stolen a dime. My narrative is clean. Yours, however, is about to crumble. My father straightened up, trying one last time to regain control. Fine, you've made your point. You're successful. Congratulations. Now, if you're quite done humiliating us, we have a reunion to attend. Our friends are waiting in the lobby. We'll be going. He gestured for Linda and Caleb to follow him toward the door. Not yet, I said. I picked up a piece of paper from the table, the bill for the room. There is the matter of the bill. My father laughed nervously. The bill, you said it was complimentary. The executive experience, remember? I also said it was subject to a strict code of conduct. I replied, holding up the paper they had signed without reading. Clause 4, Section B. Any abuse of staff damage to property or false accusations regarding theft will result in the immediate revocation of all promotional offers, and the guest will be liable for the full rack rate of the suite plus damages. I looked at the mess in the room. You stained the carpet. You ordered off-menu items. You verbally abused the bell staff. And you filed a false report about a stolen Rolex. I handed the paper to my father. The comp is void. You owe the hotel $4,800, payable immediately. My father looked at the number at the bottom of the page. His hands started to shake. I knew their finances. I knew they had mortgaged the house to pay for Caleb's failed business ventures. They didn't have $5,000. They probably didn't have $500. We can't pay this, he stammered. Isabella, be reasonable. We're your parents. You were my parents when I was 14, and you didn't pay for my food then, I said coldly. I am running a business, not a charity. I looked at the clock. However, I am a fair woman. I will offer you a choice. I pointed to the door. Option A. You pay the bill in full right now on a credit card that won't decline. If you do, you can leave, go to your reunion, and tell whatever lies you want. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Option B. You admit the truth. We go downstairs to the lobby where your friends, the Gables, the Millers, the Smiths are waiting. And you tell them exactly who I is. You tell them that I am not a drug addict. You tell them that I am the owner of this hotel. And you tell them why I really left home 15 years ago. You clear my name publicly and totally. My mother looked horrified. You want us to humiliate ourselves in front of the church group. I want you to trade your pride for your debt, I said. It's a transaction, just business. I crossed my arms. So, what will it be? The credit card or the truth? They stood there trapped between bankruptcy and social suicide. The air in the room was electric with the tension of the decision. They looked at Caleb, but he was useless staring at his shoes. They looked at Mr. Sterling, but he just checked his watch looking bored. Finally, they looked at each other. The checkmate was absolute. I wasn't asking for an apology they didn't mean. I was forcing them to buy their freedom with the only currency they cared about, their reputation. Have you ever had to force someone to take accountability when they refuse to do it willingly? If you've ever had to stand your ground and demand the truth, don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. The silence in the room stretched thin, vibrating with the kind of tension that usually precedes a structural failure. My father looked at the bill in his hand, the paper trembling slightly. Then he looked at Caleb. My brother was currently trying to make himself as small as possible, feigning deep interest in a smudge on the window pane. He offered no solution, no money, no defense. For the first time in decades, my father seemed to truly see the return on his investment, a 32-year-old man who could not pay for his own lunch, let alone a $4,000 mistake. Then he looked at me. He saw the tailored suit, the unyielding posture, the quiet confidence of a woman who commanded respect from billionaires. The math finally resolved in his head. They had bet the farm on the wrong child. My father's shoulders slumped, the air hissing out of him like a punctured tire. He placed the bill gently back on the table. He didn't look at the credit card machine. He looked at the floor. "We don't have the money," he admitted, his voice raspy and defeated. "The house is leveraged. Caleb's last venture. It didn't work out." He looked up at me, his eyes rimmed with red. It wasn't the look of a parent to a child. It was the look of a defeated man to a superior officer. "We can't pay it, Isabella." "Then you know the price?" I said, my voice soft but firm. He nodded slowly. "Yes, the truth." He took a breath, and for a moment I thought he was just going to go through the motions to save his bank account. But then something shifted. The artifice cracked. "We were wrong," he said. The words sounded foreign in his mouth, rusty from disuse. "We told ourselves we were doing it for the family. But we were just scared. We were scared you were too wild, and we were scared Caleb was too fragile. We tried to fix it by breaking you." He looked at my mother. "And we broke the family instead." My mother let out a sob. It wasn't a manipulative cry this time. It was a jagged, ugly sound of genuine regret. She looked at me, really, looked at me, seeing the scars and the strength I had built over the scar tissue. "You did this all by yourself," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "We threw you away, and you built a kingdom." She reached out a hand, then pulled it back, respecting the invisible electric fence I had erected between us. "I am so sorry, Isabella. I don't expect you to forgive us." I wouldn't forgive us. I watched them. I waited for the rush of vindication, the thrill of victory, but it didn't come. Instead, I just felt a quiet, settling peace. The monsters under the bed were just old, sad people with bad credit and a lot of regrets. I didn't need to destroy them. They'd already destroyed themselves. I had just turned on the lights so they could see the wreckage. I picked up the bill from the table. I held it up so they could see it. Then slowly, deliberately, I tore it in half, then in quarters. I dropped the pieces into the wastebasket. "Consider the debt settled," I said. "Not because you deserve it, but because I can afford it, and because the Sterling Group does not profit from the misfortunes of others, even those who cause them." My father looked at me, stunned. You're waiving it." "I am closing the account," I corrected. "But the terms remain. We are going downstairs. You will introduce me to your friends. You will correct the record, and then you will check out. You will drive home, and you will not contact me again until you can do so without asking for a thing." We rode the elevator down in a silence that was different from the one on the way up. It wasn't hostile. It was humble. When the doors opened to the lobby, the noise of the reunion spilled in laughter, clinking glasses, the chatter of old neighbors. I saw Mrs. Gable near the fountain. I saw the Reverend. My stomach tightened just for a second, a phantom reflex of the teenage outcast. But then Arthur took my hand. His grip was warm and solid. I stepped out, my parents flanking me like a guard of honor. My father cleared his throat. He walked up to the group. The conversation died down. "Robert," Mrs. Gable chirped, "we were wondering where you went, and who is this?" She peered at me over her spectacles. My father took a deep breath. He stood straighter than he had all day. "Everyone, I want you to meet someone." He gestured to me. "This is our daughter, Isabella." A ripple of confusion went through the group. "Isabella?" the Reverend asked. "But I thought—" "You heard wrong," my father said, his voice gaining strength. "We were wrong. Isabella didn't run away to get in trouble. She went out to make something of herself. And she did." He looked at me with a mixture of awe and sadness. "She is the CEO of this hotel chain. She owns this building. She is the most successful miller in history." My mother stepped forward, wiping her eyes. "She is a good woman. she added, her voice trembling. And we are very proud of her. The shock in the lobby was absolute. The whispers stopped. The judgment that had hung over my name for 15 years evaporated in 10 seconds of truth. Mrs. Gable looked at me with wide eyes. The CEO. My goodness, Isabella. Dear, you look magnificent. I nodded to them, polite, distant, professional. Thank you, Mrs. Gable. Please enjoy the reunion. The hospitality of the Sterling Group is at your disposal. I turned to my parents. They looked exhausted, stripped bare, but lighter. Goodbye, Robert. Goodbye, Linda. I said. I didn't call them Mom and Dad. That title had to be earned back, and the interest rate was high. Goodbye, Isabella, my father said. He extended a hand, then dropped it. Thank you. I watched them walk out the revolving doors, Caleb trailing behind them, looking at his phone, already forgotten. They were just guests leaving the property. An hour later, I stood on the balcony of the presidential suite. The sun was setting, painting the city in shades of violet and gold. The air was cool. Arthur stepped up beside me, handing me a glass of sparkling water. He didn't say anything. He just leaned against the railing, his shoulder touching mine. You know, I said, watching the traffic below, I used to dream about this moment. In my head, it always ended with me screaming at them, throwing them out. Reality is usually quieter, Arthur said, and more permanent. I took a sip of the water. He was right. I hadn't needed to scream. I hadn't needed to lower myself to their level. I had simply held my ground, maintained my standard, and let the truth do the heavy lifting. I had reclaimed my name, not by fighting for it, but by becoming undeniable. What now, CEO? Arthur asked, smiling. I looked at him, then back at the city that was now mine to manage. Now, I said, adjusting my blazer one last time. Now we get back to work. I believe the lilies in the lobby need straightening. I turned my back on the skyline and walked back inside, leaving the door to the balcony open, letting the fresh air clear out the last of the stale ghosts. The past was a canceled check. The future was pure profit. It takes a lifetime to build a reputation, and only a moment to reclaim it. But the hardest part is often just waiting for the right moment to speak. If you've ever had to take the high road when you really wanted to take the low one, or if you found peace after a long family battle, don't be shy to share your thoughts. Your story might inspire our future episodes. Isabella proved that sometimes the best revenge is simply standing tall in your own success and forcing the truth into the light. Have you ever had to confront a family member who underestimated you or prove your worth to those who should have supported you? Don't be shy to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the inspiration for our future episodes. We read every single comment. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.